What if the single most powerful thing you could do for your garden required almost zero effort and cost you nothing? Not a new tool, not a fertilizer, not a complicated watering system, just a thick layer of organic material placed on top of your soil and then completely left alone. Today I'm going to show you the soil blanket method, the oldest, most natural growing technique on Earth, and why modern gardeners are finally coming back to it in massive numbers. Most of us learn to garden a very specific way: tilled rows, bare soil between plants, neat, controlled, and orderly. And every summer we find ourselves doing the same exhausting cycle, watering every day, pulling weeds that come back the next morning, buying bags of fertilizer that drain our budget. We were trained to believe that effort equals results in the garden, that if it doesn't look like hard work, it can't possibly be working. But walk into any old-growth forest, look down at the floor. Do you see bare tilled soil? Do you see someone out there applying fertilizer? No. You see layers, year after year of fallen leaves, branches, and organic matter piling up, slowly feeding the soil below, and producing the most fertile ground on the planet without a single human intervention. That's not a coincidence. That's the system nature spent millions of years perfecting, and it's the exact principle behind the soil blanket method. The core idea is almost embarrassingly simple. You replicate what the forest does naturally by placing a thick layer of organic material directly on top of your garden soil and letting biology do all the work. We're talking 6 to 20 inches of material: hay, straw, leaves, wood chips, even cardboard as a base layer. You don't till it in, you don't dig it under, you simply apply it and step back. What happens underneath that blanket is nothing short of miraculous, and science has now confirmed every bit of it. But before we get into the science, let me tell you about two remarkable people who figured this out long before the research caught up with them, and why their discoveries were dismissed, ridiculed, and in some cases actively suppressed, not because they were wrong, but because they were right. In the 1930s, a Connecticut woman named Ruth Stout made a discovery that changed her life, and the lives of thousands of gardeners who eventually found her work. Tired of waiting for the plow operator one spring, she grabbed a rake and covered her garden bed with the thick layer of hay already sitting nearby. Then she planted directly through it. The results confused her at first. Her plants grew better than ever. The weeds almost disappeared. The soil stayed moist during summer droughts. She barely had to do anything. For the next several decades, Ruth Stout gardened without tilling, without buying fertilizer, and without conventional weeding. And she documented everything. She called it the no-work garden. She stopped being able to convince her neighbors it was real until they saw the harvests. Mountains of potatoes pulled up with bare hands, no digging required. Decades later, a man named Paul Gauci in Washington State developed a parallel approach using free wood chips from local tree trimmers. His garden became legendary. Trees that had no business growing in his climate were thriving. Clay soil that had been nearly lifeless transformed, within a few seasons, into dark, crumbly, life-filled earth. A documentary about his garden has been watched millions of times by people who couldn't believe what they were seeing, and who wanted to understand how soil could look like that without years of expensive inputs. What Ruth and Paul had independently discovered was the same fundamental truth. When you stop disturbing your soil and start feeding it from the top down, nature's own systems take over and outperform everything we do by hand. Now, you might be wondering why this isn't common knowledge. Why isn't this approach taught in every gardening class, recommended by every extension service, featured in every growing guide? The answer has everything to do with what's profitable and what isn't. But let's first look at what the science actually says, because the data is extraordinary. Researchers have now conducted meta-analyses pulling together data from dozens and dozens of independent studies across different climates, crops, and soil types. The results are consistent and dramatic. A comprehensive review of 74 studies with over 2,300 individual yield observations found that organic mulching increases crop yields by up to 60%. 60% without changing your seeds, without buying specialty soil, without any fertilizer whatsoever, just from placing material on the surface of your soil. The first mechanism is moisture. Thick organic mulch reduces soil evaporation so dramatically that irrigation needs drop between 14% and 70%, depending on your crop and climate. That's not a small adjustment to your watering schedule. For growers in hot, dry climates, or anyone on a well or paying municipal water bills, This alone can be transformative. The second mechanism is temperature. Organic mulch insulates your soil from extreme heat and cold. Research shows it can lower soil temperature by more than 10 degrees Celsius during heat waves. While bare soil swings 30 degrees or more in a single day, stressing your plant's roots constantly, mulched soil stays remarkably stable, keeping plants in their ideal growth range around the clock. But the most profound change happens underground, in the living ecosystem that develops beneath that protective blanket. Deep mulching creates an explosion in soil biology. Beneficial fungi multiply and extend through the soil, accessing locked nutrients your plant roots can't reach alone and delivering them directly to the root zone. Earthworm populations can increase by a factor of 10 or more under a sustained deep mulch system. These creatures do something no rototiller can. They aerate and fertilize the soil simultaneously without destroying its structure. A meta-analysis of 56 independent studies confirmed that organic growing methods significantly enhance the abundance of beneficial soil microorganisms. You're not just growing food, you're building a living ecosystem. Now I need to address the biggest myth that kept this method out of mainstream gardening for decades, the so-called nitrogen robbery theory. The theory claimed that wood chips, being high in carbon and low in nitrogen, would cause soil microbes to steal nitrogen from your plants in order to decompose. And when wood chips are tilled into the soil, this is actually true. But here's the critical distinction the textbooks missed. When wood chips are used as a surface layer and never incorporated into the soil, laboratory research has consistently shown they do not rob nitrogen from your plants. University research on mulch application has demonstrated that surface organic mulch actually increases available soil nitrogen over time as it slowly breaks down. The myth was built on a misapplication of the science. The rule is simple: keep mulch on top, never till it in. That one distinction is the difference between the science confirming the method works and the myth that said it couldn't. So how do you actually apply this in your own garden? Let me walk you through exactly how to start, even if your soil is currently compacted clay or near lifeless sand. For the hay-based approach, the key is quantity. Don't think inches, think layers. Your starting application should be a minimum of 6 to 8 inches, and Ruth Stout herself recommended starting at 20 inches because the material compacts significantly. The best hay to use is spoiled hay that farmers cannot sell to livestock. Contact local farms. They often give it away free or for just the cost of picking it up because it solves a disposal problem for them. For the wood chip approach, connect with your local arborist companies. Many tree trimming operations pay disposal fees at the landfill. If you offer them a drop spot, they will often deliver entire truckloads to your door at zero cost. Apply about 2 to 4 inches of wood chips for an established garden. For a brand new bed, go deeper. Fall is the ideal time to apply either material, mimicking the natural timing of leaf drop in forests. If you're starting fresh on grass or weedy ground, consider a cardboard base layer first. Lay it directly on the grass, wet it thoroughly, then pile your organic material on top. The cardboard suppresses everything below and becomes food for your soil ecosystem. Do not move the mulch to plant. Part the material, plant your seedlings or seeds through the gap, and let the mulch return close to, but not touching, the base of each plant. One important note: avoid chipping wood from black walnut or eucalyptus trees. Both species produce natural compounds that can inhibit plant growth and cause real problems in your garden ecosystem. The system takes 1 to 3 years to fully establish. Your second and third seasons will likely outperform your first significantly as the soil biology builds. Patience here is not a weakness, it's the strategy. Be aware. Slugs and snails do thrive in thick mulch environments, particularly around lettuce and strawberries. Use copper tape barriers, diatomaceous earth around sensitive plants, or duck-style pest patrols if you have access to poultry. In very wet climates, potato sets under deep mulch can occasionally rot before sprouting. If you're in a high rainfall area, allow your mulch layer to dry somewhat before planting, or delay mulching until after your seed potatoes show their first sprouts. Now, some real documented results from gardeners who adopted this method and recorded their harvests. A backyard trial using this approach harvested over 130 pounds of potatoes from a single modest plot, with no digging required at harvest time. During hot, dry conditions, tomato plots grown with deep organic mulch produced harvests nearly 68% higher than identical plots with bare soil. Same seeds, same garden, just the protective blanket on the soil. Here's a truth that's worth sitting with. The global synthetic fertilizer market is worth over $200 billion annually. Add pesticides, herbicides, and tilling equipment, and you're describing an enormous industrial complex. An industry that only keeps generating revenue as long as gardeners and small farmers believe they cannot grow food without buying its products every single season. A gardener who discovers they can build living soil with free local materials and reduce their growing work by 80% doesn't come back to buy synthetic inputs. The economics of simplicity don't serve corporate interests. That's not a conspiracy. It's just economics. And it's the same dynamic that shapes what gets taught in agricultural programs, what gets featured in gardening magazines, and what gets recommended at your local garden center. What you grow on your land, and how you grow it, is one of the most radical acts of self-sufficiency available to everyday people. Not radical in the political sense, radical in the original sense of the word, going back to the root. The forest has been composting without a shovel for longer than humans have existed. The soil beneath every old-growth woodland on Earth is the result of that patient, uninterrupted layer-by-layer process. Your garden can work the same way, not because of some complicated system, not because of expensive inputs, but because you chose to work with nature instead of against it and give your soil the blanket it has always needed. If this changed the way you think about growing food, if you're ready to stop fighting your soil and start feeding it, hit subscribe right now. Every week we bring you methods like this one, field-tested, science-backed, and built for people who want real food from real soil. And drop a comment below telling me what you're growing this season, or if you've ever tried deep mulching before. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to read today. I'll see you in the next one.